This isn't just a podcast, it's a movement. The Middle Ground Mike is fighting for truth and unity. Subscribe now, support us today. Links are in the notes. Stand with us. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Middle Ground Mike. We have a great guest today. Iran, they're not executing thousands because it's strong. They're executing thousands because the regime there is scared. The people are strong, but the regime is weak. There's reports from Amnesty International, UN, other document over 1,000 executions. It's significantly more. There's reports depending on you listen to 10,000, 2,000. No, that's not law enforcement. That's a regime trying to survive. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Tell everybody about who you are, and where you're from, and obviously your human rights.
Thank you for having me, and I'd like to greet your viewers and thank you for this opportunity to be able to echo the voice of the Iranian people. As you mentioned, Iran is in a very critical state right now since January 28th, when the uprisings broke out in Iran with the strike by the bazaar. And so I'd be more than happy to address that. But to introduce myself a bit, as you said, my name is Zolal, and I have been a human rights activist for practically my entire life, but I've been a member of the Iranian resistance for 26 years, and I serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, which is the parliament in exile of the Iranian resistance for the interim government in Iran.
Everybody, let us know in the comments, is this panic or power? But, when a government, to me, has to kill this many people, it's already losing control. The execution spikes equal fear, but when a government has to kill, it's already losing control. But from inside the resistance, right? When does this surge, plus January January crackdown, Trump's denied statements, what do they tell you from the resistance point of view?
I think you touched on a very important point, and that's that the brutalities that we're seeing and these crimes that are being perpetrated by the regime, it's out of weakness. It's not a sign of strength. It shows a regime on the brink of falling apart, and they're willing to do whatever needed to keep itself in power. So it has to, turn to the most extreme methods of suppression. With the Iranian regime, if you look from in the last 10 years, in the last decade, we've had a few major uprisings in Iran, from December 2017, and then we had 2019, November 2019, and then September 2022, and then today. And if you look at this past decade, you see how step by step it's evolving, the uprisings, how they're extending more and more each time, and how more radical they're becoming in their demands and in what they're pushing for. And so you see it's like a evolution in a way, because the reality is that revolutions don't happen overnight. It takes a process, and each time there's something that is being resolved, and then you see the result in the next step. Since 2019, after the uprisings in 2019, the regime knew that the situation is very critical and it's on the verge of falling apart. Fortunately, COVID bought time for the regime. It was able to force everyone into their houses for about a year, and that is why actually Iran didn't want actually a solution to COVID, because they didn't mind the fact that people were dying by hundreds and thousands. Unfortunately, the death toll for Iran during COVID was skyrocketing, but Khamenei saw it as a godsend for him, because it was able to keep people at home and create a diversion so people don't turn to the streets again. And then we have the 2022 uprisings. Right before the 2022 uprisings, a few months before, Khamenei brought in Raisi as a president. Why? Because Raisi, who had only a 6th grade education, but he was one of those who was part of the death committees in the 1988 massacre. And so he had proven his loyalty to this regime, and that when push comes to shove, he is one of those who will, do whatever is necessary to be able to keep this regime afloat, because he had proven that before. And his loyalty to Khamenei, same thing. So that's why, even though there was so much, reaction toward it, the fact that, bringing him had a lot of backlash internationally, even for the regime, and internally, but they brought him in. 2022, you saw the importance of his presence because the regime was able to rule with an iron fist and they had, control of things. But after he died in the plane crash, they brought in Pezeshkian. So everyone thought, well, Pezeshkian is probably going to be more moderate or whatnot. But the reality on the ground was the regime couldn't have someone who is more lenient or moderate because of the situation that it's in. And that's why we've seen an increase in executions under Pezeshkian than even Raisi. So in 2025, there were over 2,200 executions in Iran. And just in these uprisings, as you have said, the numbers vary because unfortunately, today is day 15 of the internet shutdown in Iran. So it's been very difficult to verify the actual numbers. But the verified number that our resistance has been able to obtain is about over 3,000 people who have been killed in the protest. The number is being, even at the United Nations, some said it might be even as high as 20,000. I mean, we have to, wait and see those information coming in to be able to verify the actual numbers. But over 50,000 people have been arrested. And the regime has now stated clearly that, we are going to hand down sentences for Mohareb, which means enmity with God, and it's punishable by death. And this is a lot of people today, I had this feeling when I was seeing the images, the videos, the reports coming in from Iran. But now I see that this is something that is being reiterated internationally, that you see a lot of parallels today to the 1980s and the crimes perpetrated then by Khomeini to keep his power. So when this regime reaches its endpoint, it really becomes more brutal. And that's what it only means, that it fears. The reality is the regime fears nothing more than the Iranian people themselves, because the Iranian regime understands one thing. First of all, they understand how Iran's society works and how its history has been. The reality is that Iran, even if you just look at it from a geographic perspective, is very different than the countries in the region. The terrain is different. The size is completely different. I mean, Iran is, I think, 3 times the size of Iraq with 4 times the population. So it's very different from Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, all these other countries. So the regime knows that at the end of the day, foreign intervention is not going to end this regime because of the vastness of the land, but also the structure of the regime. So in some countries, like for instance, in Syria, you take out Bashar Assad, this regime is gone. In Iran, if you take out Khamenei alone, that doesn't necessarily mean that this regime is gone, because it has like a whole apparatus and a system. So that is something that's important to understand. And the regime understands that. And that's why the Iranian regime fears nothing more than its people, because they know that this people, once they pass that fear factor, they are able to create that change, and nothing else will. And we had that experience like with the 12-day war in June, and how the Iranian regime actually tried to utilize that. And we see this situation on the ground too. So the regime fears nothing more than its own people. And I think if you look at the clear characteristics of this wave of uprisings in Iran, and in comparison even to what sets it apart from the previous ones, I think one of the things that everyone keeps on touching on is the nature of the demonstrations. First of all, the fact that the protests started with the strike of the bazaar. The bazaar is like the backbone of Iran's economy. It's kind of like the Wall Street of Iran, right?
Yeah.
In comparison. So once they enter the strikes, everyone knows that the issue is serious, because like even if you look at it historically, in 1979, the point that the bazaar also joined in the revolution, it was a turning point. So when they entered, immediately within the next 24 hours, the universities entered the strikes and the protests. And then all walks of life joined. So that was important. So you saw these protesters span like the generations, from different generations who were present, but also all the different ethnicities, all the different, people from different walks of life, from workers to employers to different parts of Iran's society coming together in these uprisings. And so that diversity was really important, but they were all very unified in their messaging. So the message was very clear, like within the first 2-3 hours. I think the main slogans became "Down with the dictator," "Death to Khamenei," "Khamenei, this is your final year," and like for instance, "Down with the oppressor, be it the Shah or the Mullah." So it was very clear that where the direction is and what they are targeting. The issue wasn't only the economic factor or the fall of Iran's currency. They're like, there is a single place in Iran's society right now that you could put your finger on that hasn't been destroyed completely by this regime. So this regime has to go for anything to actually change. So that is the messaging. But the other thing was everyone said we saw a new culture or a new defiance in the people. They said we've never seen so much hope in people's eyes, despite the brutal crackdown. And the fact that we saw a organizational structure on the ground. Like in the protests, if you look at the videos from especially the clashes from the first few days, you can see how there are some who are leading the protests and how they're organizing together and how they're working together. So that really helped them to be on the offensive instead of just being on the defensive in face of the suppressive forces. They were able to disarm members of the security forces and the suppressive forces. They were able to liberate complete towns and cities and have all the suppressive forces actually escape their towns or their cities. Or like, for instance, even in major cities like Mashhad or parts of Tehran, people said, at least for a few hours, the city was in the control of the people. So that is something that the regime feared. And that is why they shut down the internet. That's why they started, from the third day, they started using live ammunition, but they gave like free fire. And
Wow.
we have one video. It's from Tehran Pars. It's one district of Tehran. It's a 6-minute video. In it, you can count over 240 something, I think 246 bullets that are being fired at the protesters within 6 minutes. This is just in one area. And so the regime really had this open hand to its suppressive forces, just kill, but keep, let's make sure that we can keep our control. And that is what we saw on the ground. Unfortunately, there are a lot of reports of people reporting that they personally saw like 100 bodies around them. And the fact that, the videos that are coming in from Kahrizak, it's where they're holding the bodies in Tehran. It's devastating. Someone filmed, I think it's about a 3-minute video. He goes into all the different rooms. It's like these huge rooms full of bodies. Like each one is like the size of like a basketball court, right? And then
Wow.
there are people looking for a place to be able to put their foot, not to step on a dead body, and they're trying to identify these bodies. And there are like a whole bunch of families there trying to identify their loved ones. But there's also a video that came out that there's 4 containers, like these huge trucks, like bringing in bodies, and that are piled on one another. So you can imagine like the extent of these crimes that have been perpetrated. And right now the regime is charging the families for bullets used. These are all part of the psychological warfare to really make these families suffer more and more. The fact that they have to come and identify their bodies of their loved ones this way, because the regime doesn't know their names or anything. And so there was also a call today that came in from Iran. Right now, in the past 5 days, there have been some limited phone calls. People can make calls from Iran to abroad, but you can't make calls to Iran. And even that is very limited. The calls last about 1 to 3 minutes, and then it gets disconnected. A few people, we have had reports that like very scattered, very little, but from yesterday, people have been connecting to the internet for like a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes, and then getting disconnected. But like, for instance, some have shared like screenshots that after contacting someone on Telegram or WhatsApp or anything, they received a message from Iran's, I guess, intelligence ministry or one of their ministries making threats. Who were you talking to? And what were you saying? Like trying to give that message that we are monitoring you. We know what you're saying. We're not going to let you share information with the world of what's going on in Iran. So that is what we're seeing right now. So that just shows how scared this regime is. The regime has already announced, like some of the heads of the regime have announced that we're not going to open up the internet till probably the Persian New Year, which is March 20th. So that is like how they plan on continuing, because they fear that the minute that this internet connection is connected, people will organize again and will come back to the streets. And especially right now, when with the families, getting back the bodies of their loved ones. A lot of them are forbidden from holding ceremonies, but a lot of them are doing so anyways, and those ceremonies are turning to protests. So right now, protests are not in the form that we were seeing in the first few days, but we see clashes continue every night in Iran in the past few weeks. And one of the things that I think is really important is to understand, like, this concept isn't something that brewed overnight. For the past 14 years, the Iranian resistance has been working on a strategy that it calls the resistance units, meaning Iran, because of how, as I said, geography, how it is, it's very important to have networks, underground networks, working together in small groups of
Right.
3, 4, 10, whatever, and organizing activities, and we call them resistance units. These resistance units have been increasing their activities in a way that, if you compare in the past 5 years, the number of resistance units has doubled every year, and their activities have really gone really high. Because 2025, the last few days was the uprising, so we've been busy with the situation on the ground. We haven't been able to give a complete assessment of all the activities in 2025. But like, for instance, in 2024, the resistance units carried out over 39,000 activities in 1 year and targeted 3,000 centers of suppression. And that, for society, even if they don't know exactly who it is doing this, but first of all, it's keeping the flame of resistance alive in society. But also, everyone has seen it here and there. So automatically, when they came to the scene, they knew what they were supposed to do, because it's been in their collective, mindsets. Like, this is how you're supposed to stand in front of suppressive forces. This is what you're supposed to do. This is, how you should be protecting one another, how you need to be organized. And I think that has played a very significant role. It's something that's not talked about too much, but because I think a lot of hands are also tied because of their safety and security on the ground. But this is something that a characteristic that you can clearly see in all of the videos coming out of Iran. I think that one of the most important aspects of these uprisings has been the message that the people of Iran have, that, a lot of these, when you look at those who've been killed, a lot of them are in their teens, early 20s. But before going to the protests, they actually said their final farewells with their families, or they did videos that they posted, or maybe some of them didn't post it because otherwise they might be identified. They shared it with a relative or something, that if I die, this is my final message. And I think that shows that they completely understood the risk that they're taking, but they also saw it as a necessity. So they went with open eyes. The people of Iran know that no one's going to hand us freedom in a silver platter. We have to pay the price for it, but they're willing to pay that price. And I think that's what's really important. And you see that kind of dedication, that kind of self-sacrifice is what will open the path. And that is what the regime fears the most, because there's no stopping a generation that has made that decision. And we see the Gen Z of Iran has also learned its lesson from its previous generations. They've seen that, for instance, in the previous generations, especially after the 90s and the bloodshed that was carried out by Khomeini back then, families were very hesitant to let their children become politically active, because every family had either lost someone or they knew someone who had been killed. So they tried to safeguard their children not to be active. Today, this generation, they're like, well, if we try to keep on just safeguarding our own lives, we're never going to see freedom. Someone has to pay this price, and it better be us than for another generation to have to live the way that we have lived or our parents have lived. And so that's what we're seeing on the.
No, that's when you're kind of looking at it from that perspective, I'm trying to think, the regime is saying there's no alternative, right? It kind of like piggybacking on that, every dictatorship survives on the same myth. There's nothing after us. They fear on that, the credibility comes from transparency, right? In most governments, at least they're what we believe is transparency. If this, I'm trying to think of the best way to say it, it kind of going into how I was telling you earlier, feeding into the women aren't symbols, they're strategists. The regime doesn't fear women protesting, it fears women leading. And I remember seeing, I don't remember, ages ago, that there was, I can't think of the woman's name, but she was kind of getting a little bit of prominence, but kind of seemed to fade off, at least from Western media. And how does that work from what, them fearing women leading, and, your turning point at 18 and choosing freedom over safety.
Let's take a quick break.
The Middle Ground, Mike, isn't just another podcast. It's a movement for unity, for truth, for a future beyond the left and the right. But movements don't grow without people willing to stand up. Subscribe now on Buzzsprout. Fuel this mission directly on PayPal. Every subscription keeps the fire burning. The links are in the show notes. Be more than a listener. Be part of the Middle Ground.
Well, I think you touched on two very important issues. One is this notion that is fed that, there's no alternative, or that the people of Iran have to choose between the current regime or the previous. So I think here there's a third option, and that is what people in Iran are promoting or standing for. The reality is that there is a organized resistance, and that is what changes the whole perspective on Iran. Why do Iranians not support foreign intervention? The Iranian resistance has said for decades, not just today, for over 20 years. It was first said by Mrs. Rajavi at the European Parliament 20 years ago that the solution to Iran is neither war nor appeasement, is supporting the Iranian people and their organized resistance to be able to bring about change. Well, the reality is that if there was no alternative, or if there was no organizational structure in the opposition, then the only way out would be foreign intervention, right? But that's not the case. And that's why the people are willing to pay that price and come to this, just because they're rest assured that there is the day after we are in good hands, because there is a roadmap, there is a plan in place. There won't be like a power vacuum. The reality is that the National Council of Resistance of Iran was formed for this day exactly, and back in July 1981, serves as like an umbrella group with different groups and different like ethnicities, religions. Everyone is represented in it. It has 25 different committees, and it is really a parliament in exile. Well, when you look at this parliament in exile, for instance, first of all, it's withstood the test of time, that these people, even though there's like, for instance, people from, as I said, different ideological even backgrounds coming together, they might not agree on everything, but they agree on the core issues, and they've been able to put together a 6 plan for an interim government. And then there will be the formation of the new constitution, which will be by the elected individuals that the people elect. And then there will be free elections in Iran under the UN mandate. So that roadmap exists. And I think that what's really important about this parliament in exile is the test of time, really. It's not just on paper, it's in action. Like, for instance, you said about the role of women. Well, in the Iranian resistance, especially in the MEK, which is the main opposition group, who is a member of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, well, since 1985 has had women in leadership. And in fact, the entire leadership council currently of the MEK are women. And these are women who've shown their capability in all aspects, be it even from politically, organizational structure, be it on the ground inside of Iran, be it military, everything. They have shown that they have that, that strength and that capacity to be able to lead. And that has set a new precedent for people in Iran. I mean, I remember the president, and I said the president-elect of this movement is a woman, Mrs. Rajavi. And she's the one who has actually put this in play, because she believes that women have been suppressed systematically so much in Iran that when you remove this pressure, there's so much potential to jump. And that is the force for change. That is what will create that change, because they have that capability, and the fact that they have been suppressed so much, they have nothing to lose. So that gives them, that emboldens them to be able to strive. And that is what we've seen in practice. And I remember growing up, I think I was 12 when Mrs. Rajavi, she has a motto. She says, "We can and we must." And she says, we can and we must persevere. And the fact that she believes in women's empowerment in that regard. So it's not from I guess I don't want to use the term incorrectly, but it's not from a feminist, view bringing in women empowerment. It's in fact the path of emancipation for both men and women goes through women's empowerment in this time, especially in regards to Iran. And I think that has had its effect on Iranian society because we grew up, like our generation, a lot of us grew up with understanding that, there are no barriers and there's nothing that we can't do because we had seen it in front of us. We had seen this generation of women who were, you know, breaking glass ceilings and going through, and they were, leading this movement. And that has also had its ripple effect on Iranian society. And that's why you see women playing such an important role in leading because they know that they have that capacity and they know that because for them, those glass ceilings have been broken, even if they're not seeing it in Iran directly, but they're seeing it in the prisons, they're seeing it in the resistance, they're seeing it everywhere that, we are the ones who can change the path of our history together. And I think that is something that's a new phenomenon. And I wish that there was more time for the world to learn about it and how this has come about. And because I think there are a lot of lessons that can be learned about it. Because, this is an issue that our society everywhere around the world, we're still dealing with misogyny. So how do you
Big time.
counter misogyny? Why is it important to have equity when it comes to gender equality? And why that needs to be in the framework, gender equality, and why it's important to reach that. I think that is a very unique experience that the resistance has had. And it's something that, as I said, it's been in play from, 80s till now. So, 4 decades now that we've seen that in practice. And so I think that speaks volumes. And I think also one of the things I would like to point out is Mrs. Rajavi, I think for 20 years, but I think it might be a bit more. She presented a 10-point plan for free Iran. This 10-point plan has been able to garner the support of the majority of parliaments around the world, the US Congress, 5,000 parliamentarians around the world, about 130 world leaders, about 90 former Nobel Prize winners who have all gathered around this platform, this 10-point plan. And it's been called like Jeffersonian by many. And when you look at the points, it might seem like it's 10 points, but it so encompasses everything. Like, for instance, the first is, the rule of law and the rule of by the people. So free elections, the ballot box is the final criterion, and like the complete abolishment of the supreme leader and this whole constitution of the regime in its entirety. So even during the interim government, we will not be using the current constitution. You have to put that all in the trash, right? The second is like guaranteeing the basic rights of everyone. So freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of press, and all of that. The third is abolition of the death penalty and executions, which is really important, I think, for Iran, because these are the people who are the main victims of this regime, but they're saying in a free Iran, yes, we are going to hold the regime accountable for the crimes they perpetrated, but it's not going to be with execution and torture. That needs to be, there needs to be an end to that. To that cycle and that cycle of destruction. No one has the right to take away someone's life. The fact that they believe in separation of religion and state, gender equality that I mentioned, the rights of the different ethnicities in Iran, giving them that autonomy, but also preserving Iran as the country. So that's a very delicate balance, but that this resistance has been able to reach. Or like the fact that, non-nuclear Iran, an Iran that is in a stabilizing force in the region, not destabilizing force. And I think that every point, independent judiciary, which is really important. So every point of it, when you look at it, it really shows like the big picture of what a free Iran could look like. And I think that this is like one of the things that you could put on anyone's table and be like, okay, which one of these 10 points do you not agree with? Right. And that could be a unifying force for everyone to be able to come to terms on that roadmap. And I think that's really important. And so it also pushes back that narrative, as I said, that people of Iran are not stuck choosing between bad and worse. They can move forward. They don't have to choose between theocracy and the Shah, which was a monarchy, but it was a dictatorship, right? We can move forward to a secular democratic republic. I think that those three terms together, that encompasses like everything, but it needs to be secular, it needs to be democratic, and it needs to be a republic. So there's people's sovereignty in Iran, and that is what we're trying to aim for.
Yeah, and it's definitely difficult, especially for them there, considering everything that they're having to go through to even try to, looking at the echoes of the 1988, like I was saying earlier, the crime that never happened, and then looking at the situation now. I've seen a lot of people that have come in the media talking about the situation. They do see this as like the beginning of the end of the current regime. I mean, do you echo that sentiment?
Yes, definitely. I think that the regime has entered its last chapter. What the key factor is that the regime can't return to December 20th. It doesn't have that capability. It doesn't have that leniency to be able to change anything, to be able to go back to that. I mean, in the previous uprisings in Iran, like for instance, even in 2022, the regime was like, okay, let's remove the morality police from the streets for a while to just calm down the situation. And they were able to do that. But this time around, what are you going to do? Nothing can be done. And already the regime has created such a bloodbath that right now everyone's saying, well, between us and the regime, there's just a sea of blood. This can't be forgotten. It can't be removed. What you said about 1988, I think that there's an important issue here. Over the years, a lot of people, when we raised the issue of the 1988 massacre and why it's important to hold the regime accountable for crimes against humanity and the genocide that it perpetrated back then. For those who don't know, in 1988, Khomeini had 30,000 political prisoners executed based on a fatwa, and this was done in about 5-6 weeks. No one heard about it, unfortunately, and the reaction toward it from the international community never came. For the first time after 30-something years, this year, the UN resolution pointed to the 1988 massacre. Till now, they had never actually addressed it or even recognized it as a massacre, even though, like, for instance, Amnesty International gave a report calling it a genocide, or many other human rights organizations have given reports about it. But the reality is that back then, even over the years, when we would speak about it, everyone thought it was like something that's because it's personal to us. But we understood that if you hold the regime accountable for these crimes, then it can repeat itself. But right now we're seeing the repetition. But now this time it's in front of the public eye. The world is seeing it.
They can't
And so
hide it this time.
it's really important to hold them accountable. Back in 1988, when the massacre happened, I was only 7. My father was killed in 1988 by the regime. And I knew a lot of people who had lost loved ones during the massacre. So I still remember like the atmosphere after that. And with that, Khomeini spread fear in society for at least 11 years, because the first major uprising that we see after the 1980s is the student uprisings in 1999. So with that, Khomeini was able to create complete fear in society. And that was right after the end of the Iran-Iraq war. So for 8 years, the regime was able to keep silence by telling everyone we have a foreign enemy. So you have to stay quiet, because otherwise you're, working with the enemy, right? You're a traitor and this and that. Right after that, Khomeini knew people were just fed up with the regime. They wanted change. So he had the massacre to keep everyone intact. Unfortunately, in the 8-year war, over 1 million people died on the Iranian part alone. I think over 2 million in total people died during that war. The regime sent 450,000 children to the minefields. They used children as minesweepers instead of buying a machine to sweep mines.
Oh my gosh.
Because that's how unimportant and invaluable human lives were for them. And they would go to schools, take the children with school buses they would go to school, take the children, take them to the war zones. They would give them these plastic gold keys and would tell them, this is the key to heaven. So you have to put that around your neck. And then they would wrap them up in blankets and roll them open on the minefields. And so, unfortunately, these children would die. And that is how the regime fought. So, a regime that does that with its future generation, you can imagine that it shows no mercy to anyone. And that is exactly the message that it wanted to send in the 1980s. And now we're seeing it's being repeated. There are still images of newspapers that from 1981 that the regime published, like images of like teenage girls, and it would say, would the parents of these children come and identify their bodies, because we don't even know their names? Or there's a newspaper, it's from France, that says 200 children executed in one night. And like I've heard from people who were political prisoners then, they were teenagers themselves, but I heard, like, for instance, in Evian prison, every night they would count the coup de grace that were being fired. And every night it would be 200, 300, 400 people who would be killed every single night in Evian prison back then. And you see that now with these videos that are coming from Iran. Like, unfortunately, since yesterday, there's a video that's circulating on social media that they're going around, their bodies on the ground, they're firing the final coup de grace on these people, young girls who were just on the street, and some of them you could tell they're wounded, they're not dead, and they fire at them. And this is the brutalities of the regime. I mean, a regime that goes into hospitals and kills people who are on the hospital beds. This is considered a war crime. So where is the international reaction to it? Why is Iran not being held accountable? And that's what Iranians mean when they say we want a firm policy on Iran. Firm policy doesn't mean necessarily troops on the ground. It means hold the regime accountable. It means recognize the people's right to resist in face of tyranny and fight back. It means, look, right now there's a communication blockade on Iran. People have been disconnected from the world for 15 days. Do something about it. And I think the international community can do something about it. But also, you have to understand that you're dragging your feet. It sends a message to the regime and to the people. Right now, the issue of blacklisting the IRGC has been on the table for a while now, for a few years, actually, to be honest. But again, in the European Parliament, it's been raised in the last few weeks and also in the UK, but it's not actually happening. The European Union is not following suit, even though the majority of the European Parliament unanimously has called for it. The reason is actually the President of the European Parliament has stated this in a few different tweets that she has done in the last week. 3 countries are blocking it. Why? Well, one of them is a country that has the highest economic ties with the Iranian regime, so its interests. The other one, well, they have hostages in Iran right now. They have been, I mean, the Iranian regime has tried to carry out terrorist attacks on their soil numerous times, sometimes successful, sometimes not. So they fear the regime, the hostage diplomacy, and what the regime's reaction will be. And the reality is that that gives a green light to the regime, because what is the message? As President Zelensky, I think he said in Davos and the World Economic Forum, well, the Iranian regime realizes that if I kill brutally, then they're fine with me. I could stay in power. And that is the message that the West is giving when they don't act, because it says, okay, if you're able to suppress the protests and continue, we will keep you in place, right? And unfortunately, that is what we're seeing. Also, like, for instance, when the World Economic Forum actually invites Adolf Shi, who is the foreign minister of the Iranian regime, to come in and address the World Economic Forum, where heads of state are there, what is that message to the people of Iran? At a time that, this is on last Monday, people in Iran are mourning the death of thousands and thousands on the streets, but it's okay for Adolf Shi to come and address the international community. Well, that means, okay, business as usual, because this is an economic forum, right? Business as usual, we'll close our eyes on what is actually happening on the ground in Iran. There might be a few words of condemnation, but you know it as we do, that's just diplomacy. We have to do that. That is the message that the Iranian regime is getting. Behind closed doors, we're fine with you. You could, keep it up and you could stay in power. That is the message that is being sent by the international community right now. So Iranians are asking for a firm policy on Iran. We believe that we have the capability and the capacity to be able to create change in Iran. All we're asking for is stop supporting the regime. Unfortunately, right now, like, the regime is using AI, like face recognition technology and things like that, to identify people who are protesting, or what I just told you, like how they are monitoring people's phone calls and internet connections and whatnot. Who is selling this technology to them? They don't have it themselves. It's, these Western governments who are selling it, and they continue to do so. Or, like, for instance, just one example, there have been many campaigns in this regard in the previous years, but the Iranian regime uses cranes for execution. So cranes that are supposed to be used for construction are being used for taking away people's lives. A lot of times when you see the public execution, especially, you could see the brand of the crane, and they're mostly like German. So these German companies know that their cranes are being used for destruction of life, but they sell it anyways. Or, like, for instance,
shameful.
In different uprisings, these issues have come up. Like, for instance, Siemens was selling, technology to the regime to control phone lines and whatnot, or Nokia and whatnot. Over the years, I remember, like, in 2009, this was an issue. 2012, this was an issue. These are things that come up and go, but unfortunately, they still continue. There's so much that the international community can do which does not necessarily mean troops on the ground or, foreign intervention. It means standing by the people and supporting them. And I think that is what Iranians are asking for. They're just like, please don't turn a blind eye on the situation on Iran. Pay attention to it, act on it, not just mere empty words, but actual action. So I think that is what we're asking for, and just to be able to differentiate for that for people who hear that messaging, like, well, we don't want another Iraq, we don't want another Afghanistan. You're right, we don't either. So that's not what we're asking for, but we are asking for a tough stance on you.
No, I mean, that is very, like, it should be common sense, right? Or at least, like, hey, just based on what people are telling, like, hey, this should just be something that is default, but it's not. Your work with human rights, based off what you said, like, and what I have seen, what I was reading it's phenomenal. Trying to protect people. I wish we had more people around the world that tried to do that, no matter the situation. But revolutions need visions, before, things go, and seems to be a lot of visions going on, depending what part of the world you're from, especially there, everybody wants their vision there. And, as I wrap that up here, like, tell people where, like, where they can see your vision, like, online, like, where can they go check it out, connect with you, support where you're coming from.
Yeah, well, there is actually a website that's, I guess, more clear cut, and you could learn more about what the views of the resistance are. It's Maryam Rajavi for Change. So it's MaryamRajavi, the number 4 change.com. And you could learn more about Maryam Rajavi and her views there. There's also the website of the National Council of Resistance, everyone, which is ncr-iran.org. To learn more about the human rights situation in Iran, you can follow Iran HRM, which is iran-hrm.com. And these are really good sources for people to turn to. If you are in the US and you want to take part in activities, there are a lot of, protests and rallies and events and exhibits right now going on. You could reach out to OIAC, which is the Organization of Iranian American Communities in the US. It's oiac.org. And if you're in Europe or anywhere else, you could reach out to iranfreedom.org, and they could put you in contact with local chapters and offices for different events or different activities that are being carried out. Also, for those who might be in Europe and tuning in, there is going to be a huge rally on February 7th in Berlin. It will be marking the 1 month mark of the day of, which was the bloodiest day of the protest in Iran this time around, and the internet shutdown. But it also marks the anniversary of the 1979 revolution. So it is to honor those whose lives have been lost, but also to echo the voice of 50,000 people who have been detained, and to draw attention to their case. And so it's in solidarity with the uprisings in Iran, but also with the message of the Iranian people in support of a secular democratic republic in Iran. So the message is no Shah, no mullahs, democracy and freedom for the people of Iran. So people are coming together from across Europe. We are expecting, tens of thousands of people to be in attendance, since it is being organized very, short term. We're asking everyone to share it, invite others who you might know who might be interested to show their support and solidarity. It will be in Brandenburger Tor in Berlin at 1:30 on the 7th of February. And it will be broadcast live on social media, so you could follow the live coverage through the social media accounts of the websites that I mentioned.
I'll definitely check it out. I'll put a lot of these links in the description and the show notes for people to obviously find as well. Zolal, I really appreciate you coming on, and I really hope to have you back, and we'll make it a little bit more time efficient next time for you. Everybody, this stuff it's so important for the future of Iran and the future of the Middle East, which is like it's a hot button for all of the world, and we need to see some sustainable change there. If this episode moved you, drop your panic or power vote below, get engaged. Zolal has some really great things that she says, and I encourage you to read it, share it, go to the links that she talks about. The more people get to know the facts, and the more that there's more than just A or B choices for things that are going on. it's important. Everybody's voice should try to be heard, especially the Iranians' voices more than anybody's really in this situation. As well, thank you for coming on. Everybody, thank you for tuning in, and I hope everybody has a good day.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day, everyone.